Welcome to An Alternate Hue. I'm Hugh Anderson, and this is what caught my attention recently. Lucky for any of us that has ever broken a bone or needed orthopedic attention, that we've moved on from our early ape-like tendencies of smashing bones. Remember the opening scene from 2001: A Space Odyssey? Today's 3D printed scaffolds from CM Flex makes hyperelastic bone. It's a 3D printed synthetic bone graft made of hydroxyapatite, the mineral in your bones, and a biodegradable polymer. As of this year, it's being used in patient jaw surgeries. Surgeons print at the nano level the exact shape needed, and once implanted in the body's own cells, move into the mesh of the scaffolding, turning it into real bone while the synthetic scaffold dissolves. Other 3D products are printed with specific porosities that allow blood vessels to grow through the metal. A new biomedical trend involves depositing titanium aluminum oxynitride thin films onto 3D printed titanium implants. This creates a hybrid material that combines the toughness of titanium with the extreme hardness and corrosion resistance of oxynitride ceramic. Aluminum oxynitride is a crystal clear substance like glass, but which is almost impossible to break. The point is that today, thanks to innovation and transition, there's a cocktail of engineered proteins and bioink that can be injected into a fracture or bone lesion, creating an instant hardened bridge that recruits local stem cells to patch the hole in weeks rather than months. Now, Craig Peterson at Tier 1 Alpha explained how some insight into why there has been a steady rise in the stock market despite what can only be described as a challenging environment. Peterson said 401k models continue to show consistent inflows into target date funds, funneling roughly $33 billion into stocks per month. In a market this concentrated, those flows can have an outside impact at the single stock level, as the flows are increasingly directed into the largest names. 2.4 trillion. That's how many cigarettes are sold in China each year, nearly half the global total. Cigarette sales are falling in most countries, but in China, the numbers are going up. Smoking there rose 39% from 2003 to 2023, even as it fell 26% in the rest of the world. And while younger people are smoking less, older ones are smoking more, in part because it's an inexpensive habit in China. A pack of cigarettes costs roughly $3. In contrast, if you want a pack of Marlboro Reds, that'll be $20, thank you very much. It shows how powerful China's state tobacco company is. A single agency both regulates the cigarette industry and makes most of the smokes. The government's brand, the China National Tobacco Corporation, generated roughly $244 billion in profit and tax revenue in 2025. That's about 7% of national government revenue and nearly what China says it spends on defense. Now, a Harvard psychiatric team has spent 85 years tracking 724 men from their teenage years to their deathbeds to find out what actually makes a human life worth living, and the answer that came back is the one almost nobody in their 20s or 30s is willing to act on. For 85 years, the team measured everything they could: blood tests, brain scans, income, marriages, mental health, sleep, and loneliness. And every 2 years, the men answered questionnaires. And every 5 years, they had a full medical exam. Some of them became senators, one became president, some ended up homeless. But when the data finally came in, the result was so simple that the researchers spent years looking for what they had missed. And it was not money, and it was not IQ, and it was not social class, and it was not career success. It was not even genes. So what makes life worth living? The single strongest predictor of who would be happy, healthy, and mentally sharp at 80 was the quality of their close relationships at 50. Not the number of friends, not the size of the network, it was the depth of the connection to others. The men who had at least one person they could call in the middle of the night were measurably healthier 30 years later. The lonely ones, regardless of wealth, declined faster across almost every metric the team could measure. Now that we can bet on just about anything, let's take a look. On Polymarket, a popular prediction platform, the Wall Street Journal found 67% of profits go to just 0.1% of the accounts. The journal analyzed 1.6 million Polymarket accounts that have traded since November 2022. There are at least 2.3 million total accounts on the site. That means fewer than 2,000 accounts netted nearly $500 million. That doesn't sound like great odds to me. And what happened when the Pope had to call customer service? About 2 months after Robert Francis Prevost, a Chicago-born cardinal, became Pope Leo XIV in Vatican City, he put in a call to his bank back home in Chicago. The new pope identified himself as Robert Prevost, saying that he wished to change the phone number and address that the bank had on file. The pope dutifully answered the security questions. Then the woman on the line for the bank told him that wasn't enough. He'd have to come into the branch in person. He said, quote, "Well, I'm not going to be able to do that," unquote. The bank employee apologized. The pope tried a different tact. "Would it matter to you if I told you I'm Pope Leo?" he asked. She hung up. Now, sound waves are already used in medical scans, may have a surprising new target: viruses. In lab experiments, scientists have demonstrated how ultrasound blasts can break down influenza A and COVID-19. Microscopic vibrations caused by ultrasound waves are sufficient to rupture the membranes surrounding their viral particles, experiments have shown, rendering the viruses inactive. The research was led by a team from the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil and could one day lead to an alternative to antivirals and chemical disinfectants for enveloped viruses which have an outer membrane that's vulnerable to attack. The approach relies on acoustic resonance, and both the ultrasound frequency and the shape of the viral particles matter. The researchers also point out that viral particles like those tested are spherical, the optimal shape for ultrasound sensitivity. If these particles were triangular or square, the impacts wouldn't be the same. And in a new behavioral book, We Are as Gods, the authors Diamandis and Kotler call it the bias cascade. Here's how they describe what happens when information overload wins. It invades, occupies, and colonizes attention. When attention collapses under the weight of too much input, the brain does what it always does. It looks for shortcuts. And finally, most car crashes happen between 3 and 3:10 p.m., but most accidents with injuries take place between 4 and 4:10 p.m., according to data from Mercury Insurance. And on weekends, it shifts to noon to 12:10 p.m. The data is consistent across the country. My advice? Stay home and watch an alternate hue reruns, which you can find on our website. So that's it for this week. I'm Hugh Anderson, and this has been an alternate hue.